Welcome, friend. Tonight, let me take you into the marble halls and golden shadows of one of the most astonishing lives in the Bible. You've heard of Solomon, the king with 1,000 wives, unmatched wisdom and limitless wealth. But long before the fame, before the temple, before the scandals, he was just a boy standing in his father's shadow, trembling beneath the weight of a crown far too large for his head. Solomon was not chosen because he was strong, nor because he was firstborn. He was chosen because God had a plan, a quiet plan, one that began not with armies, but with a prayer whispered in the night. When offered anything he desired, Solomon asked not for power, nor long life, nor riches. He asked for wisdom, a listening heart to govern God's people. And that single choice changed everything. He became known across nations as the wisest man to ever live. Kings and queens crossed deserts just to hear him speak. Israel stood taller than ever before. But beneath the gold, a question lingered. Could wisdom alone keep a heart faithful? Tonight, we begin the story of a man who had everything and risked losing the one thing that mattered most. Solomon's kingdom was a marvel. Gold flowed like water. Trade routes stretched from Egypt to Tyre. The temple he built stood like a crown jewel in the heart of Jerusalem. Cedar from Lebanon, floors of polished stone, the ark resting beneath angel wings. It was a time of peace, but peace can be deceptive. To keep alliances, Solomon married. One princess, then another, and another. Egypt, Moab, Sidon, Edom. Each bride came wrapped in silk, bearing gifts, treaties, and idols. What began as diplomacy slowly became habit. 100, 300, 700 wives and 300 concubines. They brought their customs, their gods, their sacred images. Incense curled from foreign altars. Songs in strange tongues echoed through palace courtyard. And Solomon, the wise king, let it happen. He still prayed at the temple, still offered sacrifices to the Lord, but now he also stood beside Ashtoreth, beside Moloch, beside Chemosh. The line between worship and appeasement blurred. The elders whispered. The prophets watched in silence, and God, though patient, was not unaware. Behind the glittering walls of Jerusalem, something was shifting, a slow erosion of the soul, hidden beneath gold and good intentions. And the heavens, though silent, were watching. The day the temple was completed, all of Israel rejoiced. Trumpets sounded, priests sang. Solomon stood before the people with outstretched hands and offered a prayer so moving that fire came down from heaven. The glory of the Lord filled the holy place like a thick cloud. The people fell to their knees in awe. It should have been the high point of his reign, the fulfillment of a dream his father David could only imagine. And for a time, it was. But not far from that sacred courtyard, other structures began to rise. At first, they were small, private spaces perhaps, discreet altars for Solomon's foreign wives to burn incense to their gods. He allowed it for love, for peace, for politics. One here, one there, on the Mount of Olives. Beyond the valley. Soon the mount across from Jerusalem bloomed with shrines. To Chemosh of Moab, Molech of Ammon, Astarte of Sidon. And the people saw. If the king could tolerate such things, why couldn't they? The temple of the Lord still stood, magnificent and holy, but cracks were forming, not in stone, but in loyalty. And heaven, once again, was watching. Not the walls, but the heart of the man who built them. Solomon's name echoed across continents. Merchants spoke of his ports, poets of his gardens, and rulers of his mind. He wrote thousands of proverbs, built cities, organized armies, and brought unprecedented wealth to Israel. Silver became as common as stones. Every year, ships returned with apes, ivory, and gold. The Queen of Sheba herself came, bearing spices and riddles, only to leave breathless at the brilliance of his answers. He was not just a king. He was an empire wrapped in flesh. And yet, the man who could answer any question seemed to forget the one question that mattered most. Whose voice do I follow? In his pursuit of knowledge, he gathered more than scrolls. He gathered people, wives, concubines, nobles, entertainers. His court swelled with diplomats and dancers, flattery and distraction. The silence in which he once heard God's voice became muffled beneath the constant clamor of palace life. He no longer woke at dawn to pray. He no longer walked the temple courtyards with reverence. Faith became formality. Reverence became routine. Still, he ruled. Still, he judged wisely. But somewhere between the throne room and the private chambers, something shifted. A man of wisdom had become a man of compromises. The kingdom admired his brilliance, but the angels mourned what they saw from above. For even when everything around him prospered, the truest part of Solomon, his heart, was slowly drifting away from the God who had once called him beloved. There's a quiet danger in slow decisions, not the kind made in rebellion, but in exhaustion, in affection, in the name of peace. Solomon never planned to abandon his God. He simply didn't say no. One wife asked for a place to burn incense, another for a private priest, a third for a statue of her people's goddess, just a token of home. He agreed, not out of belief, but affection, not from conviction, but convenience. And slowly, what began as exceptions became expectations. He built high places for them. He attended festivals with them. He watched their rituals. He offered sacrifices. Not to Jehovah, not anymore. The man once known for fearing the Lord now feared disappointing his wives. He honored their gods to honor their feelings, and in doing so, he betrayed the covenant of his own soul. The people followed his example. If Solomon, the wisest of all men, bowed to idols, then what was wisdom for? Was Yahweh just one God among many? And Jezebel had not yet been born. Ahab was generations away. But Solomon, for all his greatness, had already opened the door through which darker kings would one day walk. He still wore the crown. He still judged rightly in public. But behind the veil of incense and music, he had become a man who no longer corrected sin, because now it lived in his own house. And heaven, still patient, still waiting, began to stir. For years, God had been silent. No fire from heaven, no visions in the night. Just the slow ache of divine patience watching a beloved son drift into compromise. But God is not absent when he is silent. One day, a prophet arrived with a message. Not for the people, not for the priests, but for the king himself. No titles, no pleasantries, only truth. "Because you have turned from me," the voice declared, "and have not kept my covenant, I will tear the kingdom from your hand." It was not a punishment born of wrath, but of sorrow. Still, the judgment was tempered by mercy. "For the sake of David, your father, I will not do this in your days, but your son will see it. The kingdom shall be torn, 10 tribes to another, one left for Judah, for the sake of my promise." The words landed like thunder in a sky too long clear. There was no dramatic reply from Solomon, no fasting, no public repentance. Perhaps the prophet left quietly, footsteps echoing against stone. Perhaps Solomon returned to his court as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The line had been crossed. And now, even wisdom could not turn back what obedience alone was meant to preserve. Solomon lived out his final years in wealth and splendor, surrounded by courtyards and servants, gold shields and polished marble. But peace no longer dwelled in the shadows of his palace. Rumors began to stir. Of adversaries rising in distant lands, of servants no longer loyal, of God raising up men to challenge the throne. And though the king aged in silk, his reign began to fray like an old robe, unraveling thread by thread. When Solomon died, the throne passed to his son, Rehoboam, a boy who inherited a fractured kingdom and none of his father's wisdom. The moment he tightened the burden on the people, just as his advisors urged, 10 of the 12 tribes rebelled. The prophecy had come to pass. The kingdom split, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. One nation became two, and the golden age of unity was gone forever. Temples to foreign gods still stood. The altars Solomon built for love remained, now monuments to a deeper loss. Solomon's name would live on in stories, but his kingdom would never be whole again. Wisdom had built a house, but disobedience had cracked the foundation. And no man, no matter how wise, could repair what only faithfulness can keep. There was no trumpet when Solomon died, no fire from heaven, no voice from the clouds, only silence. The man who once knelt in glory before the Ark of the Covenant now faded quietly behind palace walls. History recorded his death, but not his repentance. The scriptures do not say if he turned back, only that he turned away. He was buried in the city of David, the same hills where songs of worship once echoed beneath his voice. But there was no second fire, no final prayer, no grand farewell. Only the weight of what could have been. The wisest man in history died with his legacy cracked, his people divided, and his God, once so near, now distant. And yet his story was not erased, because even in failure, God keeps record of those he once called friend. Solomon's story did not end with his death. It lived on, not just in scrolls or monuments, but in warnings whispered across generations. His name became more than a king's title. It became a question. How can a man so wise fall so far? He built the temple, yes. He wrote proverbs that still guide hearts. But he also taught us something deeper, that knowledge is not devotion, and brilliance cannot replace obedience. His life is a mirror for all who are gifted, all who begin well, all who walk with God in youth but grow distracted in comfort. He reminds us that no one is too wise to wander, and yet the mercy of God still shines through the cracks. Though the kingdom divided, The promise to David endured. Through that fractured line, generations later, came a child born in Bethlehem, a greater son of David, full of grace and truth, one who would not fall, one who would build a kingdom no man could divide. Solomon reminds us that God does not only use perfect people, He uses broken ones too. And if we listen, truly listen, we may hear His voice in our own unrest, whispering, "Don't trade what is eternal for what is impressive. The gold fades, the fame withers, but faithfulness, that echoes." So we remember Solomon, not to judge him, but to examine ourselves, to stay steady, to finish well. Because it is not how a story begins that matters most, but how it ends.